All right, so we're going to learn today about measuring in science, about measurement. In science, measurement is the process of assigning a numerical value to a physical property. But that numerical value is not alone. It has to be followed by a unit. Okay, so basically, when we measure something in science, we need to use a numerical value followed by a unit. In this case, for example, 25 meters. This gives us an idea of the magnitude, of the amount that we have. But the amount of what? The amount, this is the magnitude, and this is the unit. This is the amount of what? The unit. So the amount of meters in this case that we have. And what is a unit? A unit is a standard that we use internationally for measuring, which is used to express a magnitude or a physical property. And it provides us a reference that gives meaning to the number. For example, we all know what a meter is. We all know what is 1 meter. When we say 1 meter, we know exactly what length are we talking about. And if we are using, instead of meters, we're using centimeters, that is a different unit, at least submultiple of the meter. In that case, we know that we are referring to a smaller length, because the unit centimeter, we all know that it's very small in comparison to the meter. So in order to measure in science, we need to apply or to determine a numerical value, but followed with a unit, which gives us the reference we need to compare. All right, so that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about in this video. What is measuring? Measuring is assigning a numerical value to a physical property, followed by a unit for comparison. And now we have to talk about a bit longer about what is a physical property. Because when we say 25 meters or when we say 25 centimeters, we're talking about a physical property. What is a physical property? Physical property. Okay, so a physical property is anything that we can measure about a physical object, basically. A property is a characteristic, it is a feature of a substance that we can observe or measure in an object. Properties help us describe things, identify them, also classify matter, and also talk about things in a scientific way, in a specific way, in a numerical way. We can distinguish two types of physical properties. One would be a qualitative property, qualitative, and the other one is a quantitative, quantitative. So what is the difference between these two types of physical properties? Quantitative. Well, basically, a qualitative property is a property that cannot be defined with a number. That is the case of color. That is the case of smell. That is the case of texture. All those things that we feel with our five senses are qualitative. I can say it smells bad. It smells putrid. It smells stinky. It smells good. It smells like flowers. It smells like soup. But those are not numbers. So those are qualitative properties. Each of these things is a qualitative property. In science, we try to use quantitative properties instead. Why? Because a quantitative property can be quantified, which means that can be assigned or can be measured with a number. And this is the case of properties like length, like temperature, like mass, which can be can be measured by numbers, numerically. And in these two things, we basically with this classification, we can distinguish between properties that have more value in science, quantitative properties, and some other properties which have less value. I don't mean that they're useless. I mean qualitative properties are useful in identifying substances. For example, it is useful to know the color of a liquid in order to identify what liquid is that. It is useful to know the smell of a liquid as well, or the color, etc., etc. But in order to make experiments and to get precise results, we usually prefer to look at quantitative variables or quantitative properties. So with that said, we've talked about the specific or the key things that I want to say about measuring science. We've said that it is assigning a numerical value to a physical property. Of course, that definition can only be applied to quantitative properties. Qualitative properties could be measured numerically if we assign an arbitrary scale. For example, we could measure happiness in a scale from 1 to 10 if we ask people, how happy are you feeling from 1 to 10? But that doesn't make happiness a quantitative property. That's just assigning a numerical scale to an actually very arbitrary feeling, which is not repeatable, which is one of the most important things, as we said, about the scientific method. So good things about quantitative properties is that they can be measured numerically. That measurement can be repeated by anyone, basically, and we will find no difference in those measurements. However, with qualitative properties, they are a bit more subjective. So in science, we try to avoid qualitative measurement and we try to incentivize quantitative measurement. With that said, we will see exactly what physical properties are we going to be measuring in this course. That's going to be the next video, in which we'll be talking about the different properties that exists and the units we use to measure those different properties. Thank you for listening and see you in the next video. Goodbye.